is Dave Middlebrook with The Law and You, and I am so excited about today's episode. We're going to be talking about adoption with family law expert Cindy Dunn. Welcome, Cindy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
You know, getting ready for this episode, I couldn't help but go to the Bible because all of us that are believers have been adopted. And we should be excited spiritually about adoption. So let me read the scripture. God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus Christ. Ephesians 1:5. So we're all adopted, right?
Right.
But we're going to be talking about kids getting adopted. Now, you would think of all of the things in the law that just the simplest thing should be adoption, but it isn't as simple as it.
It's not. It is not. It is a very complicated, it's very specific to the law in the state that you live in, and there are so many rules around adoptions. Because, think about it, a child that's joining a family legally is leaving another family. And so there are a lot of procedures and things that are put in place to make sure that that is a decision that everyone lives with. Because when you adopt a child into your family, they're your child.
Yes.
Just like any other child that you and your wife have, that is your child, legally
Just like
and
when you
morally.
get adopted into the family of God.
Yes.
Now remember, we're in the great state of Texas, and if you forget, that's the state of Texas flag over my shoulder. So the things we're going to be talking about specifically are going to be Texas law. But most of the concepts, I would think, Cindy, they would be applicable across the country, right?
Very much so.
So if you find yourself and you're interested in adoption, then you need to find someone that's an expert like Cindy that can help you through the process. Now, I know before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, you've got to have some great adoption stories.
Oh, yes.
Okay, bring it.
Yes,
I want to hear
yes.
it.
Well, so much of what we do in family law can be difficult and it can be sad, right? And so a lot of times when you go to the courthouse, you're dealing with divorces, you're dealing with, breakups of marriages. Everyone universally wants to be at the courthouse on adoption day.
Adoption day.
Because that's a family being created.
Sure.
I mean, the courtroom will be full of people. Family members come to watch. The judges always want to take pictures. Most of the judges will give stuffed animals and want to be involved in the pictures. And it is universally the most uplifting thing that you can do in family law. It's one of the few just across the board, very happy things.
And you were sharing with me earlier a story about a kind of a tragic story, but it turned out great in terms of there being a family created. So can you share that with us?
Yes, this was an adoption case I handled a couple of years ago, and as is frequently the situation, a young couple had been trying to have a baby, no luck, and had arranged to adopt a child from someone that they knew. Mm-hmm. And so as they were working through that process, even before the baby was born, the wife got pregnant.
No, that happens a lot, right?
It does happen a lot.
Okay, yeah.
It does happen a lot. And so now they're going to have these two babies. And tragically, during the birth of their child, the mother passed.
Yeah.
And so we have this half-finished adoption of a little girl. And then a couple of months younger, this child that is now just single dad with this little boy. So fast forward, we get to court to finalize the adoption. And he shows up and he's got literally his arms full because he's got these two toddlers. They're about 2 years old. He's got one in each arm and
awesome.
they could be twins because by the time the timing worked out, they were only a couple of months apart in age. And I'm, having to explain to the judge why I've got this single dad and where's mom and this other situation because this adoption was in process. And originally the adoption involved mom, but she has tragically passed. And so I'm explaining all this to the judge. And these two little toddlers are just wiggle, 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 wiggle.
Cool.
And my poor client is standing there and he's trying to, and the judge says, and this is a smaller county in Texas and an older judge, and he's very stern looking. And he finally says, let me have them. So now he's up on his bench and he's got a toddler on each knee, and the little girl's got his gavel and she's banging the gavel and the little boy's grabbing everything. And this judge has the biggest grin on his face and he says, "Counsel, proceed." And so, I explained the whole situation. My client testifies, but there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom.
Did you cry?
Oh, I did.
I would have cried.
We all did.
Yeah,
I think this crusty judge cried.
Oh, yeah.
It was beautiful, but it was,
Yeah.
But that's part of the reason, adoptions can be complicated. That's obviously an unusual situation, but it certainly complicated the legal process.
Okay, so I have, obviously I don't do this for a living, but I have some things that are rattling around in my head from days gone by.
Right.
And one of them is the issue of open versus closed adoption. Now, I will tell you, way back in the day, ancient times, one of the partners that I worked with was a huge proponent of closed adoption. But you're going to tell us what that is in a minute.
Yes.
And I want to understand where are we in that, and what's going on in your profession?
Right. Okay. So the concept of a closed adoption is sort of what you think of when you think you'll see a situation where somebody's trying to find their birth parents, right? Because their adoption files are still sealed. But that
sealed
meaning I can't go to the courthouse and pull a case and look at that, right? Because that is personal information. Sure. It can be sensitive information. But historically, once that adoption file was sealed, it may not have any information in there about the birth parents, and you may not ever be able to look at that record. And so that was the traditional adoption, right? Parents gave the child up for adoption. Adoption was completed. Maybe the child was never even told they were adopted.
Okay.
That has all changed. And
okay, so whoa. You're telling me that a child could, in the olden days, when I was a young lawyer,
right.
The child may never even know?
Right. The parents weren't ever obligated to tell the child. Something people, I think, don't realize is when you finalize an adoption in Texas, and every state, I think, does this, but when you finalize an adoption, the child gets a new birth certificate. And the adoptive parents are listed as the parents. So as an adopted child, you can go look at your birth certificate, and it has your adopted parents' names on it. And the hospital where you were born and the date and all of your information, but just different parents' names. And so in a closed adoption, it would be very difficult to go behind that if your parent was gone or unwilling to talk to you about it, to figure out where did you come from. And people have that curiosity, right? And so particularly there can be medical reasons, a lot of things that people would want to be curious about and want to know about their birth family. And historically, we didn't keep that open. We closed that, and it became very difficult for people to find that information out.
Now, I'm going to confess something to you. I have always questioned whether or not I was adopted, and here's why. My mom was 5'3". My dad was 5'11". My only sibling is 5'11", so I'm taller than my dad by 6 foot, sixth grade. I could go find out whether, I'm kidding, by the way, I don't think I was adopted. But you know what I'm saying? Didn't you ever have that thought as your kid? You're like going, my parents are so weird, I must be adopted.
Right.
Yeah.
I think all kids kind of go, I don't fit in with this family.
Mine was, my parents are so short, I must be adopted, or I'm so tall. So people would go through this process. I mean, they'd start looking at records, and was that kind of the cutting edge against closed adoption, is that you want people to know?
Yes.
Okay, when did that start?
Well, and it's gradually changed, okay? So even someone can go back historically and try to unseal their adoption file. Okay. And the courts used to make you have a valid reason for that. And you would have to say, well, I have a health issue and I need to know if it's genetic, or I have something that's come up. And you would actually have to go to a court and ask for permission to unseal your file, but frequently there was nothing in there. I mean, you might get a name, but you would have no information. And so as the law on that has evolved, it has led to more open adoptions, okay? There are requirements in Texas as to what information has to be in the adoption file.
Okay.
And so part of what has to be in there now is this report that tells you about your biological parents' health history, social history, genetic history, because you still hear, with the advent of DNA testing and 23andMe, people find siblings they didn't even know about. I personally know an attorney in this area that in the past couple of years discovered a half sibling that lives in Arizona that he never knew about.
What?
Through a DNA test.
Interesting. That was an interesting day.
That was an interesting day.
Yeah.
His parents aren't around to answer those questions, but the genetic story doesn't lie, right?
Okay.
But all of that information now has to be included in an adoption, and as it became more common and required to include more information in that adoption file, people started to think, well, why does this have to be a secret? Why don't we have more of an open adoption? And an open adoption can literally be whatever you agree on in terms
of birth mother?
With the birth mother or the birth father. Both parents do have a say in this. In terms of they can still be involved. They can have a right to photographs and maybe an update annually, all the way up to frequently visiting the child. And it becomes a situation where the birth parents and the adoptive parents can truly sit down, work out their own plan, and the law supports that. And so the law now says if you have that agreement and it provides for that contact even after the adoption, the court will enforce that.
Okay, so the experts out there, the psychologists and the people that have done studies, is that healthier for the adopted child for them to know that information?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, the psychologist will tell you it's healthier for the birth parent that has given up the child. It's healthier for the child to understand the scenario and what the circumstances were that led to that adoption. And it's healthier for the adoptive parents because the recognition that, frequently you would find adoptive children that historically might be resentful because they resented the birth parent that gave them up. Maybe they resented the adoptive parent that took them away. And it makes it much more open and easier for everybody to understand the circumstances and what led to the adoption.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of argue against that for a moment. Hypothetically, say my wife and I have adopted a child, and we don't want this information to be public because we don't want to think, well, on our child's 5th birthday, all of a sudden the birth parents or birth mother or whatever is going to show up at the birthday party. Are there rules to keep that?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't have to do an open adoption. You don't have to give the birth parent any, if that's the agreement, great, but the law doesn't require you to do that. And legally, that child is now legally not related to your child. I mean, that adopting biological parent, they're legally not related to your child anymore. So they don't have rights in terms of what the law would recognize as a parent's rights. Part of the process is you terminate those parental rights. And so unless you have one of these adoption agreements where you have agreed that they can see the child, et cetera, the law treats them as a stranger to your child. Okay. And so just like I couldn't go to your house and say, let me see Junior, nobody else can do that, even the biological parent.
And of course you can obviously see the other side, and that is the child, you don't want the child to be constantly in a state of chronic wondering who they are.
Right.
Okay, that's very, very fascinating. What about this issue? Is it easier? And I don't know why I have this impression, but I have this impression that it's somehow easier to adopt internationally than it is domestically. And let me just kind of tell you what I'm thinking. It's like maybe I've seen too much TV where it's like, oh, they went to one of this Tajikistan and babies are available, or Russia or whatever they might, and you just come right back, and it's a lot easier than going through the process here. Is that accurate?
It is definitely not.
Well,
it is definitely
not.
This is one that I can speak to a little bit on a personal level because my cousin adopted a child from Russia.
Okay.
Years ago. He's an adult now. But when she first contacted the adoption agency in Russia, they sent her pictures. She kind of got to look through the catalog, if you will, of all the children that were available, and she decided this little girl that she wanted to adopt. And she knew all of the information. She knew the girl's health situation, and she was an infant, which to my cousin at the time was important. She wanted an infant. So she went through all this process to be approved, flew over there, had it all worked out in advance. When she got there, they said, oh no, that child's no longer available. This one is.
No.
Yeah, a toddler, a little boy with health issues. And my cousin was just dumbfounded. Now, we've been doing this for months. This was not the plan. But she was told, you don't have to adopt this one, but if you want to adopt a child, this is the child. Well, thankfully, she went, took one look at him, and immediately had the connection, was like, that's my son, let's do this. And of course he is.
Yeah.
But then it became a renegotiation of all the terms that she thought she'd agreed to. I mean, my cousin was stuck there for weeks. She had to wire back family members to send more money because it was just, she couldn't control the situation, and what she thought she was getting into was not the way it played out. And so it was difficult. And then when she gets back to the United States, there's a separate process that you have to go through to have your child recognized legally in the United States as your child. So you almost have to do a second adoption process to get it approved. And again, there are laws on recognition of foreign court orders, like an adoption order, but you still have to go through that process, because in order to get a Texas birth certificate, or the state that she lived in was not Texas, but in order to get a birth certificate in the United States, you have to have that adoption recognized and approved, and there are rules that apply to that. So it can be very complicated. It's certainly not faster, it's certainly not less expensive, and it's definitely not less complicated.
Okay, so just to be clear here, and I'm going to pick on Russia because they deserve it. But so if I were to go to Russia, my wife and I are to adopt a baby, you have to adopt the baby in Russia or go through the paperwork there to be able to bring the baby to the United States.
Yes.
And then when you get back home, you have to adopt the baby here?
Yes, essentially.
Wow.
And it's a different process, but I had a couple years ago that had adopted twins in, I believe it was Vietnam. And when they came back, we had to go through the whole process, because you have to have this U.S. State Department recognize that these two kids that you brought from another country are legally your children. And you had to get they had to get Texas birth certificates, and there was a whole process that they had to go through once they were back to make sure that those children were recognized U.S. citizens that were their children.
Well, okay. Well, I had that all wrong. So let's talk about domestic adoption. Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, there's private adoption and then foster care adoption or public adoption. Is that accurate?
Well, really, in Texas, we refer to it as private placement or agency.
Okay, agency. Okay.
Yeah, and so we have some amazing adoption agencies. There are amazing adoption agencies around the country, and the rules are different in terms of what agencies can do as far as placement of children versus what private citizens can do with placement of children. Okay, and it's extremely important to know what the rules are in your state, because they are different.
Okay.
And if you're adopting a child from another state, even within the United States, there's a whole nother level of procedure that you have to go through.
Now, just so I'm clear, is there a third rail though? I mean, I can adopt through an agency. I can adopt through, what was the other one?
Oh, private placement.
Private placement. Mm-hmm. But what if it's just an individual? Can you not adopt from an individual?
Yes, and that would be what we would call a private placement.
Oh, okay,
yes,
okay,
yes. Okay. And we see that a lot. Somebody knows someone through their church, a young person perhaps is not married, is not in a position to take care of their child, is willing to put the child up for adoption, and you make that connection through somebody that you know.
But there's a period of time, though, where the birth mother can change her mind, right?
Yes, you cannot make a decision that you can't change your mind on until the child is born. Okay. And so frequently, that it happens.
So play that out.
The entire pregnancy, the mother is working with the family. You think this is going to
They're
happen.
bonding. They're getting ready.
They're very involved in the prenatal care of the child. But when the child's born, she changes her mind.
That's going to be heartbreaking, but as well it should be.
As it should be.
Yeah, as it should be. Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so if you're going through, walk me through an agency. So as opposed to there being an individual, my wife and I are going to the Lena Pope Agency, which is close to us, and we love them. That's right. And so we go to them, and what's the process? What happens?
Right. So they will interview you. They'll get all the backstory, and then when they have an expectant mother that comes in and says, she's willing to adopt her baby out, they will literally show her, here's the people that are interested in adopting. And the mother can pick. She can say, I want to meet this family, I want to meet this family, I want to know more about these people. And she has the ability to to say, okay, yes, I would be willing to consider these people to adopt out my child to. And then, depending on everybody's preferences, you would actually meet with her.
Okay.
But again, important to understand, she can't make a decision that she can't change her mind on until after the baby is born.
And is there a period of time in Texas, or generally, I mean, how does that work?
Yes. Okay. And so you can adopt children that aren't infants, obviously. And so the document that the birth parent signs to give up their rights is literally an affidavit of relinquishment of their parental rights. Okay. And so in Texas, there's a couple of different versions of that, but depending on how it's drafted, either it becomes irrevocable, means you can't change your mind. Either it becomes irrevocable immediately and is only irrevocable for a short period of time, or there's a period of time after you sign it in which you can change your mind and then it becomes irrevocable. And so you definitely want to get an attorney's guidance on the whole process.
Sure.
But yes.
Okay. And so I was going to ask you, I mean, what is the role of the attorney through international or through an agency? I mean, what are you doing? You're representing the adoptee family, right? The adoption family, I don't know what you call it.
Yes. So one of the benefits of an agency adoption is that you don't need your own independent attorney.
Okay.
The agency has attorneys that complete all the paperwork.
They know this drill. Yeah.
They know the drill. They dot all the I's and cross all the T's. And because of that, you will pay a fairly significant fee to the agency. Okay. And you pay that fee even if the mom can change her mind. And so a lot of times
So you pay all of that money, and theoretically, and it's birth plus 2 days or whatever, and mom says not doing it?
Yeah.
And you still pay the agency?
Yep.
Wow. And what kind of money are we talking about?
Oh, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
Because agencies have the ability to pay for things for the birth mother that you as a private citizen can't pay. Okay, so they can provide housing for the birth mother. They can pay lots of expenses, and that's part of what that agency fee does, is it covers those expenses that they're providing for the mother, as well as the attorney's fees and all the things that you aren't having to do yourself, but you still have that same situation. And I will have clients come to me that have been through the agency route multiple times and had it not pan out, and it's incredibly, it's very expensive.
It's going to be devastating.
It's devastating and it's expensive. Yeah. And so sometimes that private placement, because it's somebody you know and it's a family member of somebody that you know, sometimes those, are viewed as more likely to work out. Because
you said something I want to follow up on. You said the agency can do certain things that you can't do as a private citizen. So if my wife and I theoretically, we want to adopt a child, and it's a young lady in our church. Mm-hmm. What can we or cannot, what can we do and what can't we do in terms of supporting her during the pregnancy? I mean, are there rules?
Yes, absolutely. There are very strict rules. They're criminal rules in Texas, and every state is different. And again, adoption is very state specific. So you have to know what the rules are in your state.
State specific.
Yes, you have to know what the rules are in your state. All states have rules, but they can be different.
Okay.
So in Texas, you're limited. You can provide medical expenses that are related to the child's birth. You can provide legal expenses for the mother to have an attorney. Very limited things that you can pay for. You can't put her up in an apartment and support her for her entire pregnancy, because legally you can't do that in Texas. Because think of the influence that has in the mother.
Sure.
Right? We don't want mom to give up her child because that's the only way she could survive.
Moment of desperation.
Exactly.
And they've been influenced. I get it.
Exactly. And if the agency is involved, there's a level of protection there,
sure,
right? Because the agency is who's helping her, not the parents directly.
Okay. Here's a question I have for you, and that is, we had some friends. We have some friends that adopted. They were in the foster care program, and they had they weren't babies. They were, what you call them, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids.
Right.
And they loved them. And they were like, we love these kids and we want to adopt these kids. Is that a faster process if you've been, I don't know what the vetting is to be a foster care parent, but if you go through that and then they've lived with you and everything's great and now you want to adopt them?
It can. Okay. So because there are so many steps and so many technical steps that have to occur in order for a child to be placed for adoption, whether it's through an agency, a private placement, whether it's a child in the foster system. The foster care system itself, the Child Protective Services in Texas, whatever your state agency is, a lot of those steps may have been completed by the time the child is in your care as a foster child. For example, the biological parents' rights have probably already been terminated. So that stage of the process is already done. Or they're in the process of doing that. Okay, because for a child to be in state care and then be placed as a foster child, there's obviously an issue with the parents' rights.
Right.
Okay, and so you have the state that has stepped in to terminate this parents' rights. That is a step that you as the private adoptive parent don't have to do now. In order to be approved as a foster parent, you have to go through a process that is very similar to the process that you would have to go through to be an adoptive parent, right? One of the things that you have to go through in Texas is an adoptive evaluation. They do a pre-placement assessment before a child lives with you. They also do a post-placement assessment, which is after the child's lived with you for 6 months. Those are required in an adoption case, but it's very similar to the process you have to go through to be approved as a foster parent. So you can see some of these steps. By the time the child has been approved to be placed with you as the foster parent, you've already completed a lot of those. And so it can be a shorter process.
Less expensive, I would imagine.
Less expensive. And by the time you get, the overall process is probably about the same, but the part that you as the private person are responsible for is shorter.
Well,
because you're kind of doing just the end piece. And,
sure.
And all those middle steps have been taken care of.
Super, super helpful. Exciting topic. Like so many things in the law, I know why folks get frustrated with the lawyers because they're probably thinking, surely adoption's not complicated. But after we unpack all this, you understand, anybody would understand why it should be complicated because it's important and it impacts children's lives.
Yes.
Forever.
Yes.
So I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. And I appreciate you joining us on The Law and You. Now, if you have any questions about today's episode, see the email address below. You can send me an email. Be happy to take a look at that. Or if you have any topics you would like for us to address in the future, just let us know and we'll do our best to tackle those as well. I'm Dave Middlebrook. See you again soon on The Law and You.